life in the fashion lane. And I started that blog because I was so insecure with myself, and I was so scared about my future. And I was such an anomaly that a few years later in 2016, I got an email from MTV. And my email at that time was a life in the fashion lane blogger at gmail.com. And at that time, MTV, and the first email they wrote to me is they said, we want to offer you a TV show based on your life, but your email is way too long. So even then, when I was only 16 years old, I realized that I was going to face so much rejection in my life. So after some months, about 6 months, MTV and we talked about this show that would talk about other young entrepreneurs, and they couldn't find a cast that was good enough. And this show idea went under. And through that period of time, I was in high school, but I had just transferred to online school because I was bullied and I was a weird kid. And I consider high school and middle school to be so similar to the entertainment industry. Because regardless of whether you're a weird kid or you were a weird kid like me, or you're gay like my best friend, or you're bullied because of your race, you have to realize that your struggle and the amount of times you're told no only become a part of you. This picture here describes what a teen brain and an adult brain, the difference is. Many people don't realize that young people don't fully have access to their entire brain up until the age of 24 and 25. So when young people are making decisions, sometimes it can be hard for them to accept the word no or accept what rejection is, or even to determine what's right from wrong. And that's simply because they can't access every part of your brain. So you can't blame a young person when they're upset or sad, because they don't have the technique, they don't have the experience to learn about the world and know enough about themselves. I didn't realize what trial and error was until I sat in a major executive's office in January of last year. It was actually May, I think. It was a meeting I got by pitching so consistently for months. And it was the concept of the show that MTV had first pitched to me that I brought to this team. And I remember feeling so thrilled when they emailed me back. And they said, we see something in you, and we'd like to invite you to come into this major office in LA and meet with us. So I went in LA last year, and I was 19 years old. And I met and sat with him in this major office overlooking all of LA. And I thought that this was gonna be it. I thought, because I knew in my mind that there's one yes you need, whether you wanna work in entertainment or whether you wanna work in any other career. And all you need is that one yes to kind of take you to the next level. And after a period of time, after about 5 minutes of speaking to him, it was almost instant rejection. He said, unless I can come back to him with a celebrity backing my idea, or unless I can come back to him with thousands and thousands of more followers, I would never succeed. And I walked out of his office and I thought to myself, I am such a failure. I have not created something that's reaching enough people, and therefore I'm going to be rejected for the rest of my life. And because so much of what I do, because so much of what you do lies on the internet, I looked at the numbers on my Instagram, and I looked at the numbers that surround me constantly, and I thought to myself, I'm not good enough. So I walked across the street, and I sat down, and I started to cry. And I didn't cry because a man had said no to me, or had put me down. I simply cried because that's what people do, regardless of whether you're a woman or you're a man. We all have emotions, but we're not told and accepted enough in society to be able to cry and breathe and feel through those emotions. So I filmed myself and I posted that video on YouTube. And I posted it because I said, subconsciously in the back of my mind, one day I will come back here, or I will go back somewhere in this similar position, and I'll be able to think, how did I let somebody put me down? How did I let somebody reject me and get so deep under my skin that I thought I wasn't good enough? So earlier this year, I had an even bigger meeting with another huge company that I had got by pitching, by emailing consistently for months. And I sat there in January in California in the exact building across the street from the one with the young person with the older person who I had met with last year. And in this meeting, I listened to my manager and I listened to this other executive talk about how much value they thought I could bring to their company. And the one thing that didn't come up is my social media, because my mind is what they wanted. And I walked out of that meeting, and I thought to myself, I'm still not good enough. Though those numbers didn't come up, the society that we've created, where so many young people look to feel more confident, feel more successful, because of the amount of comments they get on an Instagram post or a Facebook post, has created such a bubble where we're just afraid to talk, where we're afraid to accept our emotions and understand who we are as people. When I was in high school, 3 young adults committed suicide. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And when you think about it for a second, if a young person can't fully access their entire brain, and we're not allowed to rent rental cars before 25, yet we're allowed to buy guns in the United States before the age of 20. Just let that sink in for a second. Because when somebody rejects you and when somebody puts you down, and you are a young person, they don't realize what that can do to you. And because of the internet and this place that we look to for self-confidence, we're constantly feeling ashamed about ourselves instead of accepting who we are and letting our incredible minds and the power that you have to change the world drive you to do something else. And I think that's really sad, because young people shouldn't be isolated and depressed, and we shouldn't be looking to the internet to become more confident. These are the suicide facts in New Jersey, obviously. It says on average, 1 person dies by suicide every 11 hours in this state. And the amount of pressure that is put on us as a society. How can a young person be expected to get straight A's, to post incredible pictures of themselves on Instagram, to not gain the freshman 15, but be eating pizza and tagging girls with gluten on Instagram, and be this standard that society has put on ourselves when we don't even know who we are? And in this bubble, and in the book that I read by Tim Bono, that was When Likes Are Enough, in this bubble, we've created a place, we've created a society where isolation, where depression and anxiety are talked about so little that is all young people have to look up to. What we see on the internet and the amount of likes that we're getting on pictures. When you go to a restaurant and you walk by the people in the restaurant, or you're walking outside past this restaurant, and you see that everybody in the restaurant is on their cell phones. Nobody's speaking to each other. Nobody's looking to talk about ideas or even talk about their days, because we don't know how. But in the old days, even when I started my blog back in 2011, social media was not a thing. Though I started this platform on the internet, it wasn't as crucial to me to grow into myself on the internet, to get more followers and become this person that you see on the internet, because that doesn't even matter. And the more that I write on my blog about my struggles and my battles, and the more vulnerable I become, the more of a response I get from people. And that's what is really shocking to me. That when I was growing up, and probably when you guys are growing up, we're seeing these people on the internet, and we're not realizing subconsciously what these pictures are doing to us. Because when we're rejected, because we have no tips and no guidance about what happens after the word no, we don't know what the next step is. And it goes back to what happiness is. And though you'll never be the wealthiest or the skinniest or the prettiest or the tallest or the best at your sport, you have to learn to just be the best version of yourself. And every week when I speak to my therapist, which is something that I think is so crucial and also not talked about enough, especially with men and women, that we're allowed, again, to have emotions and feel something and talk about those feelings. Every week when I talk to her, sometimes I have great weeks. Sometimes some weeks are so bad. And though I'm not in high school anymore, I went to high school and I went to middle school and I was bullied. So when I'm rejected, whether it has to do with my numbers or whether it has to do with just myself, I get back into that state that I was in when I was younger. And when I was told when I was a kid that I wasn't good enough and I was weird and I was pushed out of friend groups, would go on Snapchat, think about how much that made me feel, how bad that made me feel that I wasn't invited. And I didn't realize what that rejection is doing to me. So every week when I speak to my therapist, we talk about my week. And it always comes up, how was last week or how was the week before? And some weeks are so great. And last week in particular was such a bad week for some reason. And I was just stressed about the future, and I was stressed about what would happen to me in my career. And I think a little bit of that stems from the rejection that I'm constantly facing in this industry. And last week, I said that it was such a bad week, and I was specifically scared about my finances and where I would become, and where my future would take me. And she said to me, it's an exercise I think all of you should do. She said to me, what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? And I'm so headstrong, so whenever somebody tells me no, I don't even take that no. I just think of it as a yes, and I kind of push it in the corner and I make it a yes. And so I said, well, the worst thing that would happen is I move from LA, where I just moved last year, and I would move back to Connecticut, which is where my parents live. And I would move home, and slowly, the slower I kind of started to say that, and it came out, and this was the exercise she wanted me to do. I started to cry, and she started to smile. And I thought, why are you smiling? And then I thought, wait, I wouldn't move back home. And I said that to her, I wouldn't move back home because I would not want to do that, because to me that would be my idea of failure. And I like to do something every day that pushes me and scares me. And that's when I realized I subconsciously believe in myself so much more than I thought. And I encourage you to be kind to the people around you, to your parents. To think about how much you can do with your life and with your world, because likes don't matter. Rejection does, but it's part of you, and it becomes part of you. And as Taylor Swift says, you face rejection, and the next day, you get up and you deal with it. So the next time somebody rejects you, or the next time you feel like you aren't good enough, remember that before the age of 25, you can't access all of your brain. And though that is kind of scientific, the response that you have at this age, it's a lot different than you'll have in some years from now. So you have to be kind to yourself. And I encourage you to eradicate the word failure from your vocabulary. Because if I had let that executive, that producer last year win, and I hadn't walked back into another office, and I hadn't continued to push that idea, I wouldn't be here speaking with you. Because I'd still probably be looking to the internet, sitting on my phone, scrolling through Instagram, which is such a mindless thing to do. Go on Instagram. But I would have let him win. And therefore, I wouldn't become the person that I become in 5 years from now. Because rejection is such an incomparable feeling. And though it can be so terrible and so painful at times, your battles and your struggles define you. And it's up to you to determine your response. And that is what truly determines your journey. Thank you.